Hello there, horse chestnuts. Mr. Carroll here. Let's get on and read the last chapter of Kensuke's Kingdom. Chapter 10. Killer Men Come. Shortly after this, the rains came and forced us to shelter for days on end inside the cave house. The tracks became torrents. The forest became a swamp. I longed for the howl of the gibbons instead of the roar of the rain on the trees outside. It did not rain in fits and starts as it did at home, but constantly, incessantly. I worried over our beacon that was becoming more saturated now with every passing day. Would it ever dry out? Would this rain ever stop? But Kensuke was stoical about it all. It stopped when it stopped, Mickerson, he told me. You cannot make rain stop by wanting it to stop. Besides, rain very good thing. Keep fruit growing, keep stream flowing, keep monkeys alive. You also, me also. I did make a dash up to the hilltop each morning with the binoculars, but I don't know why I bothered. Sometimes it was raining so hard I could hardly see the sea at all. Occasionally we sailed out into the forest to gather enough fruit to keep us going. There were berries growing in abundance now, which Kensuke insisted on gathering. He didn't seem to mind getting soaked to the skin as much as I did. We ate some, but most he turned into vinegar. The rest he bottled in honey and water. For rainy day, yes, he laughed. He loved experimenting with the new expressions he had picked up. We ate a lot of smoked fish. He always seemed to have enough in reserve. It made me very thirsty, but I never tired of it. I remember the rainy season more for the painting we did than for anything else. We painted together for hours on end, until the octopus ink ran out. These days Kensuke was painting more from his memory. His house in Nagasaki and several portraits of Kimi and Mikia standing together, always under the cherry tree. The faces I noticed he always left very indistinct. He once explained this to me. He was more and more fluent now in his English. I remember who they are, he said. I remember where they are. I can hear them in my head, but I cannot see them. I spent days perfecting my first attempt at an orangutan. It was Tomodachi. She would often crouch soulful and dripping at the cave mouth, almost as if she was posing for me, so I took full advantage. Kensuke was ecstatic in his delight at my painting, and lavish in his praise. One day, Mickerson, you will be fine painter, like Hokusei, maybe. That was the first shell painting of mine he kept and stored away in his chest. I felt so proud. After that he insisted on keeping many of my shell paintings. He would often take them out of the chest and study them carefully, showing me where I might improve, but always generously. Under his watchful eye, in the glow of his encouragement, every picture I painted seemed more accomplished, more how I wanted it to be. Then, one morning, the gibbons were howling again, and the rains had stopped. We went fishing in the shallows, out at sea too, and had very soon replenished our stores of smoked fish and octopus ink. We played football again, and all the while the beacon on the hilltop was drying out. Wherever we went now, we took the binoculars with us, just in case. We very nearly lost them once when Kikimbo, Tomodachi's errant son, always the cheekiest and most playful of the young orangutans, stole them and ran off into the forest. When we caught up with him, he didn't want to surrender them at all. In the end, Kensuke had to bribe him, a red banana for a pair of binoculars. But as time passed, we were beginning to live as if we were going to be staying on the island forever, and that began to trouble me deeply. Kensuke made repairs to his outrigger. He made more vinegar. He collected herbs and dried them in the sun, and he seemed less and less interested in looking for a ship. He seemed to have forgotten all about it. He sensed my restlessness. He was working on the boat one day, and ever hopeful, I was scanning the sea through the binoculars. It is easier when you are old like me, Mickerson, he said. What is? I said. Waiting, he said. One day a ship will come, Mickerson. Maybe soon, maybe not so soon, but it will come. Life must not be spent always hoping, always waiting. Life is the living. I knew he was right, of course, but only when I was lost and absorbed in my painting was I truly able to obliterate all thoughts of rescue, all thoughts of my mother and father. I woke one morning and Stella was barking outside the cave house. I got up and went out after her. At first she was nowhere to be seen. When I did find her, she was high up on the hill, half growling, half barking, and her hackles were up. I soon saw why. A small junk far out to sea. I scrambled down the hill and met Kensuke coming out of the cave house, buckling his belt. "There's a boat!" I cried. "The fire! Let's light the fire!" "First I look," said Kensuke, and despite all my protestations, he went back into the cave house for his binoculars. I raced up the hill again. The junk was close enough to shore. They would be bound to see the smoke. I was sure of it. Kensuke was making his way up towards me infuriatingly slowly. He seemed to be in no hurry at all. He studied the boat carefully now through his binoculars, taking his time about it. "We've got to light the fire," I said. "We've got to." Kensuke caught me suddenly by the arm. "It is the same boat, Mikasan. Killer men come. They kill the gibbons and steal away the babies. They come back again, I am very sure. I do not forget the boat. I never forget. They very wicked people. We must go quick. We must find all orangutans. We must bring them into the cave. They be safe there." It did not take him long to gather them in. As we walked into the forest, Kensuke simply began to sing. They materialized out of nowhere, in twos, in threes, until we had 15 of them. 4 were still missing. We went deeper and deeper into the forest to find them, Kensuke singing all the while. Then 3 more came crashing through the trees, Tomodachi amongst them. Only one was missing, Kikimbo. Standing there in a clearing in the forest, surrounded by the orangutans, Kensuke sang for Kikimbo again and again, but he did not come. Then we heard a motor start up somewhere out at sea, an outboard motor. Kensuke sang out again, louder now, more urgently. We listened for Kikimbo. We looked for him. We called for him. "We cannot wait any longer," said Kensuke at last. "I go in front, Mikasan, you behind. Bring last ones with you. Quick, now." And off he went up the track, leading one of the orangutans by the hand, and still singing as we followed. I remember thinking that this was just like the Pied Piper leading the children away into a cave in the mountainside. I had my work cut out at the back. Some of younger orangutans were far more interested in playing hide and seek than following. In the end, I had to scoop up 2 of them and carry them, one in the crook of each arm. They were a great deal heavier than they looked. I kept glancing back over my shoulder for Kikimbo and calling for him, but he still did not come. The outboard motor died. I heard voices, loud voices, men's voices, laughter. I was running now, the orangutans clinging round my neck. The forest hooted and howled in alarm all around me. As I reached the cave, I heard the first shots ring out. Every bird, every bat in the forest lifted off, so that the screeching sky was black with them. I gathered the orangutans together at the back of the cave and huddled there in the darkness with them, as the shooting went on and on. All of them. Tomodachi was the most agitated, but they all needed constant comfort and reassurance from Kensuke. All through this dreadful nightmare, Kensuke sang to them softly. The hunters were nearer, ever nearer, shooting and shouting. I closed my eyes. I prayed. The orangutans whimpered aloud, as if they were singing along with Kensuke. All this while Stella lay at my feet, a permanent growl in her throat. I held on to the ruff of her neck just in case. The young orangutans burrowed their heads into me wherever they could, under my arms, under my knees, and clung on. The shots cracked so close now, splitting the air and echoing round the cave. There were distant yells of triumph. I knew only too well what this must mean. After that the hunt moved away. We could hear no more voices, just the occasional shot, and then nothing. The forest had fallen silent. We stayed where we were for hours. I wanted to venture out to see if they had gone, but Kensuke would not let me. He sang all the time, and the orangutans stayed huddled around us until we heard the sound of the outboard motor starting up. Even then, Kensuke still made me wait a while longer. When at last we did emerge, the junk was already well out to sea. We searched the island for Kikimbo, sang for him, called for him, but there was no sign of him. Kensuke was in deep despair. He was inconsolable. He went off on his own, and I let him go. I came across him shortly after, kneeling over the bodies of 2 dead gibbons, both mothers. He was not crying, but he had been. His eyes were filled with hurt and bewilderment. We dug away a hole in the soft earth on the edge of the forest and buried them. There were no words in me left to speak, and Kensuke had no songs left to sing. We were making our sorrowful way back home. Along the beach, when it happened, Kakimbo ambushed us. He came charging out of the trees, scattering sand at us, and then climbed up Kensuke's leg and wrapped himself round his neck. It was such a good moment, a great moment. That night Kensuke and I sang 10 Green Bottles over and over again, very loudly over our fish soup. It was, I suppose, a sort of wake for the 2 dead gibbons, as well as an ode of joy for Kakimbo. The forest outside seemed to echo our singing, but in the weeks that followed I could see that Kensuke was brooding on the terrible events of that day. He set about making a cage of stout bamboo at the back of the cave to house the orangutans more securely in case the killer men ever returned. He kept going over and over it, how he should have done this before, how he would never have forgiven himself if Kakimbo had been taken, how he wished the gibbons would come when he sang, so he could save them too. We cut down branches and brush from the forest and stacked them outside the cave mouth so that they could be pulled across to disguise the entrance to the cave house. He became very nervous, very anxious, sending me often to the hilltop with the binoculars to see if the junk had returned. But as time went by, as the immediate threat receded, he became more his own self again. Even so, I felt he was always wary, always slightly on edge. Because he was keeping so many of my paintings now, we found we were running out of good painting shells, so early one morning we set off on an expedition to find some more. We scoured the beach, heads down, side by side, just a few feet apart. There was always an element of competition with our shell collecting. Who would find the first, the biggest, the most perfect? We had not been at it long, and neither of us had found a single shell, when I became aware that he had stopped walking. "Meckerson," he breathed, and was pointing out to sea with his stick. There was something out there, something white, but too defined, too shaped to be a cloud. We had left the binoculars behind. With Stella yapping at me all the way, I raced back along the beach and up the track to the cave house. Grabbed. So, horse chestnuts, we've nearly finished the text. Only a few more pages to go, literally. However, what I'd like you to do is look back on the text that we've just read, and I'd like you to answer the following questions. So I'd recommend that you press pause, look through each of the questions, and then go back through the text and check that you give enough evidence for each answer. You've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 questions here, okay? And then there's some questions on the next page which I'll flick to into in a minute. But make sure, as I said, you give that evidence, okay? Don't just guess, don't think you've got the answer, go back and check, okay? You can see here, we've got another 4 questions here for you to answer carefully, but really do make sure that that evidence is found. I'm looking forward to hearing your answers and seeing what you say. Thank you very much, take care, and tomorrow we'll finish the story.